Hey folks, it is Saturday evening. I am here in my lovely Brooklyn apartment and I am ready to have a great conversation. Welcome, welcome, folks. I am so sorry. It has been way too long since we've had a nice evening chat here on social media, and I want to give you the full 9 yards. I want to tell you all that what we do here is really, really special. You don't get this anywhere else. The brand of politics that we're espousing here is very different than the mainstream left, and it's certainly not right-wing. We're giving something very, very special. Shout out to Tim. Hello, Tim. Shout out to Ronnie Miller. Hello, Ronnie. Shout out to Kazuya. Shout out to Ryan. We're all joining the conversation. But don't forget to tweet this out, because yes, this is not going to be 20 minutes. I am going to give you a full conversation tonight. It's been way too long. I apologize to you all. I say this from the bottom of my heart, with deep, deep love. I apologize to you all, right? Because, there's been a lot going on in the world right now, as I'm sure all of you are aware, and which we are going to get into later. But I want to make clear that you all are so important to me. I haven't been doing the same number of lives that I've been doing before, but I'm going to get back on it. But a lot has been going on. Shout out to Lanza, someone from Venezuela is watching. Glad to hear it. But I care deeply about all of you, and the kind of conversation we're having here is super, super important. And the events, particularly in Venezuela, and the reaction that we're seeing from U.S. media and from the so-called left in the United States just illustrates how important what we're doing here is. We are doing something that is unfortunately unique. We are having a conversation about politics, and at this point, there are things that need to be said that aren't being said. So welcome, folks. If you haven't tweeted this out and shared it, please go ahead and do it. Let's make this a big conversation. So today, there was a UN Security Council meeting. The 15-member body that leads the United Nations convened, and U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo used this meeting to basically call for the overthrow of the Venezuelan government. Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro was just sworn in for his second term after being elected. The right wing boycotted that election. They did not participate, so surprisingly, they didn't win, right? You lose 100%, you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. They boycotted the election, did not participate. Lo and behold, Nicolas Maduro won by a huge margin, and was just reelected, inaugurated, and so now this opposition figure, this marginal figure in Venezuela, this individual named Juan Guaido, has declared himself to be the president. In front of a crowd of a bunch of his supporters, he took an oath and declared that he is the president. Now, he was never elected to the office of president. He just says he's the president. And lo and behold, U.S. President Donald Trump has declared that he agrees with Mr. Guaido, that Mr. Juan Guaido is the president of of Venezuela. Now, this is happening, and this looks to me like this is a last-ditch effort on the part of the Venezuelan opposition, because their window is starting to close, right? The oil prices are not dirt low like they were back in 2014, 2015, 2016 even. Oil prices are up again, They're not astoundingly high like they were during the Bush years, but they're reasonable. We're hovering around $50 a barrel. Meanwhile, at this point, a lot of the folks who left Venezuela when they were having the difficulties are returning to Venezuela. The situation in Venezuela is starting to stabilize. And because of that, the right-wing extremist opposition that wants to bring free market capitalism back to Venezuela is saying our window is starting to close. If we're going to be able to overturn everything that Venezuela has achieved since the rise of Hugo Chavez, since the Bolivarian Socialist Road opened up, since the defeat of the 2002 military coup, if we're going to be able to overturn it all, if we're going to be able to do that, we're going to have to do it now or never, because things are starting to improve in Venezuela. The crisis is starting to edge. Things are starting to improve. That's basically what's going on here. We've got Maduro sworn in for his second term. They've started their cryptocurrency, the Petro, that's very popular. They've got a new plan to fix up the economy, and things in Venezuela are starting to improve. And so the right wing wants to not lose their opportunity. They're hoping that they've got to be able to overthrow Mr. Maduro, because at this point, things are starting to get better. That's the story that you're not getting in the mainstream press, right? The food shortages, a lot of the problems that they were having, they've been solved. Now, I mean, things are not perfect. There are still issues with consumer goods, toilet paper, such, but they're starting to improve things. And Russia and China have stepped up tremendously to aid their comrades in Venezuela, to back them up as they try to build an independent socialist country in Venezuela. They've gotten a lot of Chinese support, a lot of Russian support. Iran has been supporting them. Nicaragua, Bolivia, other countries have stepped up. Even the new president of Mexico has been very adamant that Nicolas Maduro is the president of Venezuela, and that Venezuela is starting to improve things. So at this point, the right wing is saying now or never. They want to remove Nicolas Maduro, and they want to remove the United Socialist Party, and they want to privatize the oil, and they want to turn the country back over to billionaires and bankers. They want Wall Street and London to once again sink their fangs into Venezuela. And I want to comment, because the way this is being portrayed in U.S. media is that all of Venezuela's problems are caused by socialism, when in reality, you can see constant admissions of the fact that that's just not the case, even in mainstream American media. I made a video where the Wall Street Journal, in their weekend review, admitted that back in 2013, Venezuela's economy was doing very, very well. There were huge construction projects everywhere. The hotels had to be booked for weeks in advance. They said they were showering petrodollars on everyone. When the oil prices were high, prior to the dramatic Saudi-Obama oil price drop, things in Venezuela were actually going quite well. The problem started in 2014. Socialism started in Venezuela. The official road to 21st century socialism that Hugo Chavez announced, that actually started in 2002. And Hugo Chavez was elected president in 1999. So Venezuela has been on this road since 1999. The problems that began, the problems that have caused the current crisis, began in 2014. So there's a pretty big gap. If socialism automatically makes a country poor, not logical, not adding up. And you'll see this admitted in the press, but they just want to make it, socialism caused the problem. Well, if you watch these broadcasts, you know that socialism turned China into a global superpower. Socialism conquered outer space. Socialism defeated Adolf Hitler. Socialism turned the Soviet Union into a world industrial superpower and a powerhouse of industry, right? So this notion that socialism just caused the crisis, that's pure fiction. But, we want to get in a little deeper, because furthermore, people say, well, the people of Venezuela, maybe they think that socialism has caused the crisis, right? They blame Maduro for this. They blame socialism. They blame Marxism, and they want American capitalism. They just want, the American free market system. Well, I was in Venezuela in 2015, and I spoke to people on both sides of the election, the parliamentary election or the National Assembly election that took place in 2015. And I spoke to a lot of people who voted for the MUD, the M-U-D, the Movement for a Democratic Roundtable. And none of them, not a single one of them I spoke to, including some very, very wealthy people, not a single one of them told me they wanted capitalism. They said, we agree with socialism. A lot of them said they admired Hugo Chavez, but they wanted socialism to be implemented differently. And they eventually, after the election, people started referring to the 2015 vote as a voto castigo, or a punishment vote, saying that they were punishing the United Socialist Party for not handling the crisis correctly. That was the sentiment that I heard on the street. Not a single one of these people was saying that they felt like they were going to vote for the opposition because they wanted, Venezuela to be just free market, capitalist. They wanted Venezuela to be a free market, unregulated country like Guatemala or Honduras or Haiti. No, they did not say that. I never heard anyone make that sentiment. And interestingly, even this individual, Juan Guaido, who's been appointed by Donald Trump to be Venezuela's president, even he claims to be a socialist. He's not. He's from George Washington University. He's tied to CIA and to think tanks and to all kinds of U.S. special interests. He's completely compromised and working with the forces that want to bring down the Venezuelan government. He himself is openly calling for the overthrow of the government by claiming he's the president. But Even he claims to be a social democrat, and he is not even telling people that he would bring free market capitalism to Venezuela. At this point, the Pope does not say he believes in capitalism. Most of Latin America at this point, is Roman Catholic, and the Pope is not saying he believes in capitalism. As much as the Pope has condemned Maduro and condemned the United Socialist Party, even he is not saying he believes in capitalism. Nobody in Venezuela, you can go down the line. Henrique Capriles, who used to be a big leader of the opposition in Venezuela, he also claimed that he was a socialist. The opposition has given up. They lost that battle. At the beginning, in the Chavez years, in the beginning, when that was going on, they tried. They tried to run this line that, oh my God, we can't be socialist. They'll make us a poor country like Cuba. They'll make us poor. Socialism makes countries poor, but if we're free market and privatize everything, we'll get rich like America and we'll be. They tried to run that line. That was the line of the opposition. And the line of the opposition was that, if we can just be capitalist, it'll work. They used to demonize Hugo Chavez for being part African. They would call him a monkey. Actually, they called him a monkey. They called him a monkey. They tried to run this line, oh my God, Chavez is appointing dark-skinned people that are just poor and dirty. They tried to run that standard right-wing line that America and the USA and the free market system is ideal, and these dark-skinned people are inferior, and communism makes everyone poor. And the people of Venezuela didn't buy it. They didn't buy it. And they didn't buy it in one election, and they didn't buy it in the next election, and they didn't buy it in the next election, and they didn't buy it in the next election, and they didn't buy it in the next election, and they didn't buy it in the next election. And so the right wing regrouped. And they got Henrique Capriles, and he comes out and he says, I'm a socialist too, but I want to get along, and I'm going to be more mixed, and I'm not going to be a hardliner. And they run a different line, because they want to win. The opposition isn't even trying to run the stupid Dinesh D'Souza, PragerU, Fox News line on Venezuela. If you go to Venezuela, the right wing are acting like sheeps in wolf's clothing, or wolves in sheep's clothing. They're going around trying to tell people that they want more of the same. They're just going to run it better. So anybody who tells you that the people of Venezuela are just suffering under the evil socialism of Maduro, and they just, the USA wants to go in there and make them free, and they're begging for American democracy, and that's just not the reality. I've seen it with my own eyes. I've paid attention closely to what folks are saying, and nobody in Venezuela, from the political establishment, whether it's the opposition, none of them are saying they want to restore capitalism. People told me horror stories of what capitalism was like in Venezuela during the 1990s, the free market, when the IMF and the World Bank were in there in Venezuela. People talked about how the electricity would go off in neighborhoods for weeks. Why? Because the IMF would loan money to Venezuela. And when the IMF was loaning money to Venezuela, they got, to oversee your budget. And they would come back and they'd say, oh, you're spending too much money on maintaining municipal power. You got to lay off some power workers. You got to stop fixing the repairs. Oh, so they would cut, neoliberalism, cut. And then the electricity system would go off for weeks, and people would have to go on strike until the electricity came back on. People used to talk about how the garbage wouldn't be collected under the old system, right? It was, again, the international bankers, the IMF, the World Bank would say to the Venezuelan government, hey, you're hiring way too many sanitation workers, right? Oh, all these sanitation workers, why are you wasting money on all these public employees? So they would cut, and pretty soon the garbage wouldn't be collected. And so people would have to burn tires, and the Communist Party organized protests where they would collect the garbage and dump it on major highways and light it on fire and do all kinds of things just to get basic services taken care of. Why? Because the mantra of the IMF and the World Bank and Jeffrey Sachs and Milton Friedman and Alan Greenspan and all of these advocates of, hey, just privatize everything, survival of the fittest, let the poor people just starve, that kind of thinking destroyed Venezuela in the 1990s. Hugo Chavez's political leadership traces itself back to an incident called the Caracazo, 1989, I believe. In Venezuela, they privatized, they didn't privatize, but they cut. They had huge cuts in spending on public transportation and raised the costs of public transportation. The fees went up. And the people of Caracas, the capital, were not going to take it. And they went out in the streets and they fought back. And they rebelled. And it was just a huge uprising that took place. And Hugo Chavez, a paratrooper, who at that time said he did not believe in Marxism. He called himself a Bolivarian, and he said he believed in neither capitalism or socialism. He was for the third way, inspired a lot by Juan Perón. He came in and he tried to seize power in a coup. He tried to take power in a coup. That didn't work. He went to prison, got out of prison, and then he ran for office. Movement for the Fifth Republic. He took office 1999. He used the military to rescue people during mudslides. He had kind of a grassroots movement against neoliberalism that had his back. And when that happened, the response of the USA was to pull off a coup against Hugo Chavez. 2002, they tried to remove him from power. And the rank-and-file soldiers who loved Hugo Chavez, loved his reforms, loved how he was using the military to help people. Imagine that, having the military help people, not just blow things up and kill people, not just break strikes, but actually having the military help people, mobilizing the military to go into neighborhoods and build things and stop, mudslides and just build things in the communities. At that point, that's when Chavez announced, after he had defeated the coup, that he believed in socialism. Socialism for the 21st century. 21st century socialism. And Hugo Chavez announced it, and that it would be Bolivarian socialism. It would be a socialism rooted in the democratic and progressive anti-colonial traditions of South America, named after Simón Bolívar, the liberator, the anti-colonial fighter who defeated the Spanish colonizers and who abolished slavery on the South American continent. Bolivarian socialism. And Venezuela, since then, has been moving down the road towards socialism, and Bolivia joined with them, and Ecuador joined with them, and Nicaragua joined with them, and they maintained a very close alliance with Cuba, and have been very helpful to the Cubans in giving them oil. Cuba has sent them medical aid in exchange. What has been happening in Venezuela? They've been trying very, very hard to build a better society, and they did it in a lot of ways. Wiped out illiteracy in the country. Right? In a lot of developing countries, you have massive illiteracy. You have a lot of people in certain developing countries, in certain countries in South America and Central America, you got a lot of people that do not speak Spanish. They speak indigenous languages, right? There've never been schools provided to them. They've never had teachers and literacy training. They're up in the mountains and they're practicing their indigenous language, and they don't even speak Spanish, right? That's how it is. Go to Peru. There's whole sections of Peru where people do not speak Spanish. There are whole sections of Guatemala and Honduras where people do not speak Spanish. They're not literate. The governments there are so free market, so much in line with what Milton Friedman and Ayn Rand and Jeffrey Sachs, so much in line with Adam Smith's way of thinking, that they don't provide people with the ability to become literate, right? And do these people, in addition to not having schools, have running water, electricity? Are you kidding me? Right, that's the condition. People have been kept in just dire, dire conditions by global free market capitalism. But the Venezuelan government that came in was a government of action. Action, right? Mobilizing the country, wiping out illiteracy, building universities, building infrastructure, building hydroelectrical power plants, and utilizing the oil profits, not as just kind of a middleman for American corporations, but having the oil revenue go into the public treasury to fund social programs. They built, I saw them with my own eyes, these healthcare clinics where anyone can just walk in, anybody, right? Me as an American, not even a citizen there, you could just walk in and get healthcare provided to you by Cuban doctors. Cuban healthcare clinics where anyone can walk in and get healthcare for free, right? And, I saw it with my own eyes. I saw the community centers they had built. They took me to one neighborhood when I was in Venezuela, and they had built just this beautiful theater. This beautiful theater. It was like a state-of-the-art theater, like the kind of stage and audience that you might have at like a high school in a nice suburban neighborhood in the USA. And they built it. And the people in that neighborhood told me, you know what was here in this lot before we built this really nice community center with a theater? This was the place that people sold heroin. This was the place that people used to take stolen cars and break them apart for the parts, right? They didn't want to have it at their house because that could be used as evidence against them in court. So the car thieves and the heroin dealers used to hang out here. But now, this is a community center. And the kids put on their school plays. And we have the high school graduation ceremony here. That's what Bolivarian socialism has done. I went to another place in Caracas where I saw a radio station. And it was a radio station built by the government, a community radio station where anyone in the neighborhood could apply to get time on the radio and get a radio program and spread their own perspective. I met young anarchist punk rock kids who that was their radio station, and they played anarchist Spanish punk rock, and they did their thing. And you know what? A lot of them were rather critical of Maduro. Some of them told me they were voting for the opposition, but it didn't matter. They were still allowed to utilize this radio station, available to the community. Grassroots democracy, right? What Venezuela has done is really unprecedented. And the problems that began, and I know some folks have probably seen, there's a video of me, it's got like millions of views. I'm on this video of people getting owned, and they played a clip of me arguing with this stupid right-wing Turning Points USA kid at either the Democratic or Republican conventions it was the Republican convention back in 2016, and he's trying to tell me that the reason people in Venezuela have a food shortage is because of socialism, and I'm arguing with him, and I'm saying, actually, I've been to Venezuela, and the reason that there are food shortages is because of capitalism, because all the food marketers are private, and he's insisting the food is all nationalized because it's socialism and the government runs everything. And I'm saying, actually, no, in Venezuela, there's a very big private sector, and Venezuela doesn't have that much agriculture. It's basically an oil-centered economy, and they're importing their oil, and this kid has no clue what he's talking about. He's a good libertarian, and he tells me, oh, you should read this book, about and telling me I'm a leftist who just got fooled, and it's a Potemkin village, and it's an interesting argument, and apparently a lot of people thought it was interesting. This video apparently went viral, and there's a clip of me arguing with this young free market kid about Venezuela. And apparently that clip did very, very well. But it makes me angry. It really does make me angry seeing these people that just sit there and insist all of Venezuela's problems are because of socialism. I mean, if it wasn't for socialism, there'd still be mass illiteracy in Venezuela. If it wasn't for socialism, they wouldn't have these beautiful universities that I've seen. If it wasn't for socialism, that lot that I saw where they have this beautiful community center would still be a place for heroin dealers and car thieves to hang out, I mean, socialism has achieved so much in Venezuela. There are difficulties now, and they have been blockaded. They have been economically attacked. A lot of their money has just been straight up stolen. In Belgium, all the funds they have in U.S. banks have been frozen. They've just been robbed. There's some blatant economic warfare going on. And at the Security Council, we heard it from Russia. Russia was straight up saying, look, it's no secret that the countries that are blaming Venezuela and bemoaning all the hardship in the country are the very ones that have fomented the crisis. In fact, during the height of this whole situation, when they were telling everyone how awful the Venezuelan government was because people weren't having food, there was a group of Americans who tried to send food to Venezuela. This was covered in Chinese media. They tried to send food to Venezuela, and they got a nice threat from the Office of Foreign Assets Control and said, you cannot send food to Venezuela. And the Office of Foreign Assets Control, trying to enforce these U.S. sanctions, prevented people from sending food to Venezuela. So when the U.S. government is actively preventing people from sending food to Venezuela, how in the world do they then have the right to say, oh, look at those evil leaders, they won't let their people eat, they're doing it? Like, that's like shooting somebody and saying, what a crazy person is, you just shot yourself. That's the logic of what's being said there. I get fired up about it because I've been to Venezuela and I've seen it with my own eyes. And I've been to Ecuador and I've seen it with my own eyes. I have seen what socialism has achieved in so many countries. And I know the reality. And also, anybody who has walked through Ohio or Michigan or Illinois or upstate New York or Detroit in the last couple of years, that's capitalism, folks. That is the free market system playing out and taking effect. That is profits over people. That is huge global international corporations and bankers sucking the life and the wealth out of communities and devastating people. And socialism is when you have a government of action that controls the economy and fights for working families. What a night it is, folks. Crazy times here. And I must say, and I don't want to get too much into this, right? Because nobody likes a naysayer. But I must say, there's a reason that these lives are so important. Because if you look at leftists in the USA, they ain't saying much about it, right? It was trendy as possible back in 2004 to talk about Venezuela. When Hugo Chavez was at the United Nations calling Bush the devil and saying, I smell the sulfur, When Noam Chomsky, and he was waving Noam Chomsky's writings around, when the oil prices were high, when George W. Bush was the most hated president in U.S. history, it was very easy to defend Venezuela. And all of them, every Trotskyite, anarchist, social democratic, professor, liberal was out there sympathizing with Venezuela. But now that things have gotten harder and the Venezuelans have had to get tough, now, where's the left, right? Where are they, right? There was a rally in New York City. I do not go to rallies, and I was not there, but some friends of mine were there, and there were only a few people that were there. Only a few people in the so-called tanky parties were there. All the Trotskyite, anarcho, social democratic, liberal, democratic, social democratic liberals, whatever, the workshop on capitalism, Amy Goodman crowd, where are they? Right? The coffee shop, free mumia, smoke lots of marijuana, play lots of drums, they weren't there. Right? It's really, really, really crazy. These are scary times we live in. And I must say, part of the reason for that is that Venezuela is just having to face reality, they have tried, and I saw it, in the U.S. media, they always tell you that Venezuela is like a brutal, totalitarian dictatorship, right? Oh, it's a brutal dictator, Hugo Chavez, brutal dictator, Maduro, oh, they're brutal. I was there in 2015. I saw advertisements for the MUD on television. Very, very well-made advertisements, I might add. Very well paid-for advertisements. I was there. I watched it. I saw MUD people out on the streets campaigning. I saw the opposition in Venezuela. I heard people constantly criticizing the Venezuelan government. This idea that Venezuela is some kind of an autocratic, totalitarian state, no, it wasn't. And in fact, they bent over backwards. They have just bent over backwards to accommodate the Venezuelan opposition, to let them participate, to let them be part of things, to let them do what they want to do. They've given them time on TV. They even allow them, their ballots in Venezuela. They allow the opposition, all parties get to sit there and design the ballots, right? I mean, the level of accommodation, right, and the amount of media. They took the license of one TV network after it was calling for straight-up violence. They took its license, RCTV, I believe it was called. But I mean, the opposition media denouncing the government, people protesting, people running for office. I saw it all. They have bent over backwards to allow opposition to socialism in Venezuela. And those folks have not calmed down a bit. They continue to kill police officers. They continue to blow up healthcare clinics. They continue to engage in subversion. They continue to urge people to boycott the elections. They declare the elections are not legitimate months and months before they happen, right? The opposition has not calmed down. And in more recent months, the Venezuelan government, out of necessity, as they face a barrage of economic warfare internationally, as they face a barrage of internal subversion, they've had to get tougher. When you're facing an onslaught, you got to get tough. You got to play hardball, right? And that suddenly makes it hard for a lot of people that are leftists to like you. A lot of leftists go, oh boy. Oh, wow. Now the New York Times is writing articles, saying that they violate human rights. I'm not going to defend them now. It's very sad. They've had to play hardball in the face of an onslaught. And they're getting tough over there, right? They're defending themselves. They are up against it. When a country is facing an all-out state of war, trying to survive, the ability for it to just be a human rights paradise where everyone can do whatever they want, starts to fade. There's a very good track from Michael Parenti where he talks about how the Sandinistas came in, and they were talking almost like Trotskyites. They came in there and they said, hey, we're not going to be authoritarian Stalinists. We're going to do it the nice. We're going to have democratic socialism here. But pretty soon they had an insurgency on their hands. They had the Contras. People were coming down very hard on them, and pretty soon they had to have a secret police. And pretty soon, they had to be much more authoritarian. And that's the reality, folks, is that, as Mao Zedong very famously said, revolution is not a dinner party. It's not painting a picture or writing an essay. And Venezuela is trying to survive. And, I'm not an expert, and I'm not going to sit here and say that everything they've done is correct, and I'm not going to sit here and say that everything they've done is wrong. But I'm telling you that it's not a pretty picture. Everyone that's on the left likes to sit there and go, well, if I was there, what I would do is this. And it's like, well, I'm sure you would really like to think that, right? But when a country is blockaded and having food shortages because the imperialists are so determined to overthrow the government, when there are Colombian paramilitaries coming over the border and assassinating people, assassinating prominent politicians and TV hosts, at that point, the ability to just play nice and be the good guy and quote unquote be the bigger man, you start to lose that ability. And that's the sad thing is I've seen it with my own eyes. The Venezuelan leadership wants to be as open and democratic and transparent as they can be. I mean, their voting system, for example, right? I was there. I went to the National Election Center. So they have an electric voting machines, which we have here in the USA. But unlike the US electric voting machines, after you vote, you get a receipt, a tag, that says who you voted for. And when they get the electronic voting results, one of the first things they do afterwards is they audit, and they make sure that everyone's tag matches the numbers. And if the numbers do not match exactly, they can't certify the results. So they have an electric voting system, but it's not an electric voting system that can just be hacked. Our electric voting system here in the USA, a different story. There's a lot of people that are really suspicious. Read some of what Greg Palast or Mark Crispin Miller have written. We don't have a paper trail for our electronic voting systems here in the U.S. In Venezuela, they have an electronic voting system because it's more efficient. However, they're very careful to make sure that the paper trail matches the electronic voting system. There you go. Another thing you've been seeing in the press is, oh, well, Maduro is paying people to vote for him. He's giving people food and stuff so that they vote for him. No. People are getting food in exchange for voting. Why? Because there is a group of extremists in the country who are killing police officers and bombing healthcare clinics and blowing up bus stations and are telling people don't vote. And so the government says, look, if we're going to give you free food with the CLAP program, if we're going to give you benefits, you need to go vote. You don't have to vote for us. It's a private ballot. And I saw that too. It's a private ballot. No one's standing over your shoulder. But if we are going to economically subsidize you while we're in a state of war, then, yeah, gotta go vote, right? I mean, that makes sense, right? That when there are a group of terrorists and extremists that are urging an electoral boycott, and the government is giving people free food, at that point, is it such a moral outrage that the government would then say, but if we're going to give you this free food while we try to fight off the terrorists, you're going to have to participate in the election? Is that a crime against humanity? I mean, it's very different. They say, oh, he's paying people to vote for him. No, he's not paying people to vote for him. But yes, if people want to get benefits from the CLAP program, from the food program, in some cases, they're being required to vote. And that makes sense. When there are forces there that are trying to delegitimize the elections and delegitimize the government. That's very different. People are not being paid for how they vote, but they are being told that if they want to have a government job, that they need to vote. And I personally, in my personal opinion, think that in the circumstances that they are in, that makes sense. But again, in an ideal society, right? In an ideal situation, maybe that wouldn't be okay. But in the situation that they are in, where they're having to make tough choices and defend themselves, that situation starts to make a little bit of sense to me. Now, a couple other things I wanted to talk about Venezuela. I'm sitting here, I'm telling you how much outrage I have about how everything's being misrepresented in the media. I've been to Venezuela, I've seen what's actually going on there, and then I turn on Fox News, or I listen to PragerU, or I hear all these people, these wise guys, how's Venezuela do it? They don't know what they're talking about. But put all of that aside, all right? Just from a purely pragmatic perspective, if I believed every lie about Venezuela, if I hated Maduro with all my guts, I would still be very, very worried right now. Why? Why would I be worried? Because not only is Venezuela, a sovereign country that the USA has no business telling who should run it. On top of that, Venezuela's locked and loaded. That military that they have, that has been the base of the revolution since day one. Hugo Chavez was a paratrooper, right? There is nobody more pro-socialist and revolutionary than that Venezuelan military. This is all this talk like, oh, well, there's going to be a coup against him. No, there's not. No, there's not. The military has come out and they have said, we ain't going nowhere. We are standing behind Maduro. That military gets trained in Cuba. In Cuba. And, they ain't going nowhere, folks. They're not going anyplace. And in addition to the military, it's not just the military. They've got a whole network of what they call Bolivarian militias, community militias, neighborhoods where, young people, young men, young women are trained in how to use firearms. And they're organized into Bolivarian militias that are part of, parallel to the Bolivarian circles where people in neighborhoods get together and read Marx and Lenin and the writings of Simón Bolívar and study ideology and the basis of the revolution. And I've seen that too. And people in their neighborhoods, in addition to the actual existing Venezuelan military, you've got a population that is ready to fight. And in addition to the actual military, and in addition to the Bolivarian militias, you've also got the colectivos and the communes, right? These are basic little like socialist communities or utopian, communistic communities in the middle of Venezuela, right? I went to a couple of them. I went to one in central Caracas. I went to another one. Some of them are Christian. Some of them are like Maoist. Some of them are explicitly communist. Some of them are explicitly religious. Some of them are more anarchist. They have kind of their own ideologies usually. They have their own kind of take on things. But you go to those communities where people all kind of live together. They share their property, and they're basically giving their whole lives to the revolution. They're like dedicated full-time activists and revolutionaries. Sometimes they engage in production. Like one place I know they were making pottery. They made pottery for the country. They had like a pottery factory they collectively owned. Those communes, they're armed also. I mean, those folks have got guns. And I met this young woman. I mentioned this in a video I made earlier this week. It must be said, I met this young woman. She was in one of the communes that was more Christian-oriented. And I remember she said that she believed that God had brought her to earth for a purpose. And that purpose was to die for socialism and for Bolivarianism, right? And, this young woman had been an orphan, and she did not speak Spanish. She had been a child without parents, alone in Caracas, couldn't even speak Spanish, was adopted by this Christian socialist commune, grew up under Bolivarianism, met her, she's wearing military khaki pants, she's ready to die for the revolution, right? And there's a lot of young people like that. The Chavez generation, people who've been watching Hugo Chavez and Maduro on TV since before they could walk, right? And they live in poor neighborhoods where the government has been able to take care of them, and they've seen, I walked through one neighborhood in central Caracas where every single house had been paid for by an interest-free loan from the government. Every single one. Prior to that, people had lived in shacks without running water or electricity. People have seen socialism just transform their lives. And that there is a base in the country. A lot of people in the country are critical of Maduro, think he's not doing the best job he could. They wish he would do it better. They want socialism to be implemented differently. But there is a base of people. There's a solid core in that country that will not move. They are like a rock. Right? They are like the base of that revolution. They are tied in with the military. They are tied in with the Bolivarian militias. They are tied in with the communist and socialist ideology and the communes and the colectivos. And those folks ain't going nowhere. Right? Those folks will go down fighting to the last man. I saw that with my own eyes. They live in neighborhoods where they got big paintings of Mao and Stalin and Salvador Allende and Che Guevara up there and revolutionary priests from Central America. And those folks ain't going nowhere, right? If the USA were stupid enough, I shouldn't say the USA because I'm not stupid enough, and I know the majority of people in this country would never favor it. But if the leaders of the USA, who are tied in with these big bankers and corporations, are actually stupid enough to invade or attack Venezuela, we would be facing another Vietnam. It would be another Vietnam. I'll tell you that much. It would go on and on and on. And lots of Americans who should be in the United States serving their country by building hospitals and schools and storm levees and water facilities and serving the country by making life better for Americans, who signed up with good intentions, right? They wanted to help their country. They wanted to protect the country from terrorism. A lot of good Americans, a lot of good working class people would die if we invaded Venezuela. I can guarantee you that, because the population of Venezuela would not roll over. They wouldn't just accept being invaded by the United States, a country that has already subject them to economic warfare, a country that has been involved in trying to overthrow their government at least since 1999. The Venezuelan public is locked and loaded, very high rate, one of the highest rates in all of the hemisphere. I think it's not as high as ours, but it's quite a high rate of gun ownership in Venezuela, of private gun ownership. This idea that socialists and communists want to take everyone's guns away. Oh, they've got guns in Venezuela, right? The socialists and communists have been running Venezuela since 1999. They've got guns. Oh, Lordy, you better believe that they have got guns in Venezuela. They have got guns. And there's a section of the population that ain't going nowhere. Wow, what a day it is, folks. I tell you, I covered the Security Council meeting. I was on the air starting at 9, and I was out there, and I came home, and I took a nap, and I listened to some Beethoven. Wow, we've got so much to discuss. So much is happening in the world. I am going to drink some orange juice, right? The beverage that will not be named has a lot of caffeine in it, and as you can tell, I'm already quite fired up. I don't need to be that fired up. So I am just going to drink some orange juice. They say that's good for you in the wintertime, right? Shout out to my friends Miriam and Joe. Miriam in particular has pointed out to me how good orange juice is this time of year. So much to discuss. And someone's asking, is it an adult beverage? Well, no, it is not. I do not drink alcohol. It's weird. Alcohol has always just dried me out. I'm a very dry person. I'm very nasal, and I don't know what it is. Every time I drink alcohol, I either get ill that moment, or I get ill the next day. And it just doesn't do much for me. And so I remember one time, my wife and I, we were at the movies, and it was one of those movie theaters here in Brooklyn where you can actually order a glass of wine. This was like 2-3 years ago. So I ordered a glass of wine with the movie. I drank like 2 sips of that glass of wine, and my head just started hurting, and I thought, why do I do this? And so I got home from the movie. I said to my wife, I said, you know what? I am not going to drink again. And so I haven't drank again ever since then. And, hey, I'm not morally opposed, I guess. There are people who drink responsibly. I know alcoholism is just a plague on society. And that alcoholism can't really be separated from capitalism. It is very much tied into the stress and sadness of that people face in this society. I know when the Irish immigrants first came to the United States, one of the ways of controlling them was by paying them in alcohol. I bet you didn't know that, right? When people were building the railroads, when these working class Irish guys, Irish Catholics came over, in the United States and were being paid to build the railroads, right? One of the ways they controlled them and made sure they wouldn't unionize was when they gave them their paycheck, instead of giving them just money, they would give them whiskey. And basically, they better drink it or else they're losing their money, right? And it was a way of, getting people into situations where they're dependent, where they're more violent, where they're less excited about organizing. So alcohol abuse and alcoholism is tied in with capitalism. But at the same time, I know a lot of people who drink responsibly, and it's part of working class culture, right? People go to pubs and bars, and it's just part of culture. Now, it's interesting because I'm an Irish American, but I'm actually descended from Irish Protestants. And my mother's family, they didn't believe in drinking alcohol. My father's family, they're also Irish Protestants. They drank lots of alcohol. So it's just kind of a cultural thing. In Islam, the Islamic tradition, they don't drink. And they think alcohol is an abomination. And that's their religious belief, and they're entitled to that. And it's interesting because there are a lot of more conservative Protestant groups, like my mother's family, who are against alcohol. I've always wondered why that is, because according to the Bible, the first miracle of Jesus Christ was turning water into wine so that people could drink. So I've always wondered, why a Christian would oppose drinking alcohol when clearly, if you believe in the literal word of the Bible, then didn't Jesus magically turn water into wine so people could get drunk at a wedding? I don't know, but not my business. I'm not here to talk religion, but I just think it's a little bit interesting. But yeah, no adult beverages here. I will say, though, my addiction to that diet beverage that will not be named is a bit of a problem. If I don't get, that particular soda, it's a problem. So I'm very dependent on that particular soda. That's why I'm trying to hold off of it, because it's full of caffeine, keeps me going, but it's a little too much. I think the problem is that I never learned to drink coffee. A lot of people, they learn to drink coffee. They get their caffeine from coffee. I'm not one of those people. For whatever reason, that bitter taste of coffee I don't particularly like. And then people say, "Oh, you just got to put some sugar. Put some sugar and some milk in your coffee." And it's like, yeah, but then at that point it becomes a candy bar. And it's so loaded in sugar that by the time you drink it, you get your little sugar high, and then you're tired again, and so the caffeine doesn't work. So I've just never been able to. Diet soda is my addiction, my drug of choice. It's one of the less dangerous addictions. I don't know if it's worse than cigarettes or not. I don't know. It might be worse than cigarettes. Honestly, people often try to get me to stop drinking that diet soda. They'll say to me, "Don't you know that's embalming fluid and stuff?" I mean, I don't know if it's embalming fluid. That sounds a little bit extreme, but you can Google it. There's some horrendous health effects associated with it. I'm always careful to drink a lot of water to try and dilute it, so I'm not just drinking that. But there you go. I mean, beverages are interesting, but this time of year, orange juice, oranges are very, very good for you. So shout out to the friends who recommended I do that. We're getting a little more light. I was very serious there for a moment when I was talking about Venezuela, but there's plenty more that we can talk about. But so much has been happening in the world. We've been way, way, way behind. I haven't had a chance to talk to you all the way I wanted to. So shout out to you all. And remember that, hey, what we're doing here is really, really special. I wanted to, one point I wanted to make about Venezuela before is, I'm not here for call-out culture, and I like to praise what's good about people. There might be somebody out there who I disagree with 90% of the time, but they say something good, and I'll praise them for it. But I want to say, Jacobin Magazine, which is supposed to be the voice of socialism, I looked at their Twitter page. All this crisis has been going on. They haven't said anything about Venezuela. That bothers me. I also noticed that we haven't really heard much from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Now, I know the new congresswoman, the new Muslim American congresswoman who was elected, has spoken up and said that we shouldn't meddle in Venezuela. I also know that Tulsi Gabbard has spoken up and said we shouldn't meddle in Venezuela. I'm happy to hear about that. And there's things I like about Ocasio-Cortez also, but she hasn't spoken up for Venezuela, and that disappoints me. And Jacobin Magazine, again, there are things about Jacobin Magazine I particularly like, but they haven't spoken up for Venezuela. Come on, guys, get on it. Get on it, right? That's the first thing everyone says to Ocasio-Cortez, Venezuela, right? Jacobin Magazine, Venezuela. So if their answer is, whoa, how about that baseball game there? Oh, did you see, is that a bird over there? I mean, that's not going to work. That's the first thing anyone says now. If you say that you believe in socialism, is Venezuela. So if you don't have an answer, or if your answer is, that's not real socialism, well, then you're kind of not answering the question. So I hope that more forces will speak out against Venezuela. I hope that the rallies around Venezuela will get bigger, and that more people will speak up and say we don't want a new Vietnam in Venezuela. But there you go. There you go. So what else is going on? Well, coming up, there's going to be a great event here in New York City. I think it's backwards on your screen. Maybe that doesn't help, but it's going to be a great event. It's coming up. It'll be next Saturday. And it's called, I don't know if it's backwards, if you can see it or not. It's called, Is America the New Rome, and Will It Fall? And it's going to be just a great event in New York City, an educational event. It's called An Evening of Socialist Education. And it's going to be a really, really great event. We're going to have, there's a folk singer, a good friend of mine who's been, a folk musician for a long time. He sings a lot of the socialist folk music. He is going to play some music. It's going to be beautiful. And then there's a young woman who's an activist and an organizer here in New York City, and a student, and she is of Haitian descent, and she is going to give a presentation about Haiti and the history of Haiti and what's gone on in Haiti. And then I will be giving a presentation that I have put a lot of work into called Is America the New Rome, and Will It Fall? I've done a huge amount of research on the fall of the Roman Empire, and I will be doing my best to give a socialist interpretation of Roman history. And what can we learn from the fall of Rome, from the economics of Rome? And I've done a huge amount of reading, and I have prepared to give, an inspirational speech. It won't be me up there reading a piece of paper. This will be an inspirational speech I've prepared to give. I'm very excited. It's going to be a fun evening. I know there are some folks coming in from out of town for the event. I know there are some folks from here in New York that are coming around. I know there's a lot of promotion going on. I got friends of mine that are handing, these palm cards and posters out at their universities. It's going to be a fun evening. I think there's going to be a lot of folks there, and it'll be, it's not just going to be, socialist meetings can be really, really serious, right? And this is not some kind of political thing. I'm not a political activist. This is a meeting of education and discussion. It's a student group, and they've asked me to come and give this presentation. We're going to have this event, and it's going to be fun. There's going to be music. There's going to be discussion. There's going to be some presentations. I'm really looking forward to it. So I hope you can make it. If you're in New York City, check out the event. It'll be coming up. Is America the New Rome, and will it fall? Be there or be square, or just hear about it afterwards. You'll miss out if you're not there. If you're in the New York City area, you really ought to come to the event. It's going to be a lot of fun. I guarantee it'll be a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to it, and I'm trying to make this a stellar presentation. I really enjoy doing this kind of thing. I enjoy speaking. If I didn't do that, I wouldn't be on here right now, because I enjoy this. This is fun for me. It's fun for you. We're all having a great time here tonight. So welcome, welcome. Plenty that we can talk about. First of all, I wanted to talk about, I've been talking about, Venezuela quite a bit. And there's another event that happened this week that I think is important to take note of. And people might disagree with me here and say, well, this isn't important. I think it's very important. Roger Stone, who was a Trump campaign advisor, Republican strategist going way back to the Nixon era, was arrested, right? He was arrested as part of this Bob Mueller investigation. And they arrested him, but it's quite interesting that he was arrested. And the way he was arrested, right? He was arrested in the early hours of the morning before the sun came up. They arrested him at his Florida residence, and CNN just happened to be there, right? CNN was there to show 29 FBI agents break in to the home with a SWAT team to the home of an elderly man and drag him out of his home, right? And, putting the whole issue aside, right? CNN is claiming, oh, well, the FBI didn't tell us. We just found out about it. How would you have found out that at like 5 in the morning, the FBI was going to raid a man's home? How would you have found that out? Trump, to his credit, he did tweet out that, and a lot of people seem to be thinking on social media, that there seems to be some level of collusion between the FBI and the media. And the other thing that I think needs to be pointed out is, the FBI is part of the federal government. And until Friday, midday, the federal government was shut down. And the FBI was putting out all kinds of press releases saying that they couldn't get anything done, right? Oh, we're letting people go. We're not indicting people. We can't do anything because of this shutdown. We don't have the resources. We don't have the people. Oh, my goodness. We can't do anything. The government's shut down. We don't have any resources. Well, if they couldn't do anything, why were there 29 agents available to go raid the home of someone at 5 in the morning? If the FBI can't do anything. And what's also interesting is, why was it necessary to bring 29 people to raid the home of a guy who's probably not even armed, who said that he would have turned himself in, right? Roger Stone has been telling the media that he expected to be indicted at any point. His lawyers have been in touch with the FBI. It's been very clear he would have turned himself in, right? He's a public figure. He can't exactly go into hiding or flee the country, and he's not going to. So all of this could have been avoided. They simply could have had him come in and get indicted and leave. But yet they had 29 agents go bust into the home of a guy. Yes, there are fights going on among the ruling class, folks. There are divisions among the circles of power in the United States. The FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, which supposedly can't get anything done because the government is shut down, managed to raid the home of a non-violent man and drag him to jail and have the whole thing shown on television, right? Gotta ask yourself what's really going on here. And I must say, this comes just in the aftermath of the FBI grabbing Marzia Hashemi, a reporter, a woman that I've met on many occasions, and grabbing Marzia Hashemi, not charging her with a crime, and forcing her to testify before a grand jury, holding her in federal prison without charges, A lot of it in solitary confinement, right? So the FBI grabs Marzieh Hashemi is basically calling it a kidnapping at this point at an airport. She's grabbed at the airport by the FBI, dragged away to a federal facility for 10 days without being charged with a crime. And again, the FBI is saying they can't do anything because the government's shut down. So what's going on here? The FBI can't do anything. The government's shut down. Nothing's getting done. The bad guys are all getting away. And they're raiding the home of Roger Stone. They're dragging away Marzieh Hashemi, not even accusing her with a crime, holding her in a federal facility. And yes, she is out now. No charges, right? Not accused of any crime. They just needed her as a witness. Right? Something's going on here. There's this whole thing that if you say deep state now, people go, oh, you're one of those, aren't you? It's Alex Jones over here. Deep state. Oh, there he goes. But that's a term that's been around a long time. And especially like in the Middle East, people would talk about the deep state, referring to the secret police and the intelligence agencies and all of that. There's a history of it. It's a real thing. Governments tend to have, institutions that enforce their will that tend to not be very well observed, that tend to operate in the shadows in order to get what they want. And I wanted to talk about FBI, because the FBI is an interesting institution. A lot of people say, well, what's the FBI? They're just like the detectives of the government. It's the Federal Bureau of Investigation, right? They're just the guys of the Justice Department. No, right? Prior to the FBI, we had something called J-Men. If you look at old mystery novels from the 20s, and before that, they always talk about the J-Men, the J-Men, the J-Men, right? Well, that stood for Justice Department. They were Justice Department men. And the J-Men, that was the, cops of the federal government. If you were going to get arrested on federal charges, you got arrested by a J-Man. A J-Man would show up and you were under arrest. And that was how it was done. The Justice Department has always had guys who walk around with, badges and guns and are federal cops, right? So that's not what the FBI is. Prior to the J-Men, you had the Pinkertons, which were like a private security force set up to break strikes and all of that ended up getting hired by the federal government around the time of Abraham Lincoln. Whole history of the Pinkertons, So that's not what the FBI is. The FBI is the creation of J. Edgar Hoover. J. Edgar Hoover was a congressional librarian. He worked at the Library of Congress. He lived with his mother. He was kind of a nerd, kind of a socially awkward guy. But the Bolshevik Revolution happened in 1917. And he seized the opportunity. He was a good public speaker. And so he went around, to Congress, to different people, started giving speeches about the evils of communism and just stirring everyone up to be really afraid of communism. And at the time, Mitchell Palmer was the head of the Justice Department, and so he started carrying out what were called the Palmer raids, where they just started grabbing immigrants, people who were legally in the country but not born here, and if they were a communist, socialist, anarchist, you were deported. Just thousands of people just rounded up and deported for being, left-wing in their political views. It was a big thing. And at the time, there was a wave of ultra-left adventurism. Some anarchists, anarchists who were inspired by the Russian Revolution and such were doing some, bombings or whatever. And J. Edgar Hoover, he became the voice of, we got to stop communism. The Reds are coming. The commies are coming. And he just really made a big name for himself in Washington, D.C. as the commie hunter, as the anti-communist. And so, after he got enough of a big name for himself, they gave him a wing of the Justice Department of his very own, the BOI, the Bureau of Investigation, eventually known as the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And that in a lot of ways, the FBI was very much kind of a little personality cult around J. Edgar Hoover. For example, now we all know that the FBI investigates crimes, arrests people, whatever. But they also had radio shows. I kid you not, you can look this up. The FBI had radio programs in the 1930s to dramatize their activities. They would arrest, a bank robber, like Machine Gun Kelly or somebody. And they'd have a radio play with actors pretending that they were J. Edgar Hoover and pretending that they were the FBI and acting it out. They distributed comic books. Yes, comic books. Promoting J. Edgar Hoover and, this guy, J. Edgar Hoover, it was a little bit weird. The FBI is a bit of a strange institution, right? And then we all know, about what eventually happened in the 1950s, the Red Scare, the COINTELPRO program, where they basically went out of their way to smash the Communist Party, to go after the Black Liberation Movement, to go after Martin Luther King. Their stated goal was to prevent the rise of a Black Messiah. We know about that really, really nasty letter that J. Edgar Hoover sent to Martin Luther King in which he urged him to commit suicide. They leaked a tape to the media claiming to prove that Martin Luther King was homosexual when he wasn't. They went out of their way to just try and destroy Martin Luther King. And for a while there was divisions. I know that like Ramsey Clark, the U.S. Attorney General, he was, impeached. He was not removed from office, but he's actually the only U.S. Attorney General to have ever been impeached because he refused to cooperate with them and wiretap Stokely Carmichael. And that was very famous. And that the FBI seemed to be at war with the Attorney General under Kennedy and Johnson, who was Ramsey Clark, who was a kind of a progressive. And then we know Richard Nixon was very close to the FBI. And when he came in there, he told them, hey, don't hold back. Just get rid of the Black Panthers. Just come in there. And that was a division, right? It seemed like the Kennedys and the Johnson administration were trying to hold back the FBI and be friendly to civil rights. And Nixon was in with the FBI and said, smash the peaceniks, smash the commies. And that division was taking place. And we also know that J. Edgar Hoover died. And when he died, a lot of his files were shredded and destroyed. So he basically destroyed all the evidence. Many people suspect that he was gay. I think there's a lot of evidence that he was gay. There's also rumors that he was a cross-dresser. It's not exactly confirmed, but the FBI is a peculiar institution, right? Now, that was all a long time ago. That was the mid-'70s. Today, things are completely different. From what I understand today, a lot of FBI agents are Mormons. Now, that's interesting to me. You wouldn't think that, right? Because Mormons are, in most of the United States, Mormonism is kind of obscure. People think about Mormons, they think about, like, Jehovah's Witnesses. They're like, isn't that one of those weird kind of Christian cults or branches of Christianity where they're, like, knocking on your door and trying to convert you? But if you go out west, Utah, Idaho, Arizona, Northern California, Washington State, being a Mormon is pretty normal. The Mormons are a pretty big deal out west. In this part of the country, they're not as normal, but there's articles. You can read articles on the internet. Why Mormons make great FBI agents. And it's very interesting that apparently, in the post-Hoover FBI, Mormonism is one of the top religions. I think that's fascinating. So the FBI is a peculiar institution, but the FBI is very much its own thing, right? You have the Justice Department. Technically, the FBI is a wing of the Justice Department. But, for example, right, at the very end of Bill Clinton's presidency, as Bill Clinton was preparing to leave office, there were rumors that Bill Clinton was planning to free the political prisoner Leonard Peltier. Leonard Peltier is a Native American who is accused of murdering FBI agents. His lawyers and many other people believe it was friendly fire. It was the standoff between the American Indian Movement activists and the FBI. And a lot of people have looked at the case and said, look, those are FBI bullets. This was friendly fire. I'm sure there are other people that don't agree with that. Regardless, Leonard Peltier was convicted of killing an FBI agent. So he's been in federal prison. He's life in federal prison. So there were rumors, just rumors, that Bill Clinton was planning to free Leonard Peltier as he left office, right? And that David Geffen, I guess, who was a big supporter of the Clintons, both Bill and Hillary, David Geffen is a supporter of Leonard Peltier. He wanted Leonard Peltier to be free. I think George Soros also, has a thing about Native Americans. He wanted Leonard Peltier to be free. So there was rumors that, hey, Bill Clinton, he was going to leave office. He was going to free Leonard Peltier. And so then Louis Freeh, the director of the FBI, called a rally, a protest at the White House, and thousands of FBI agents were out in front of the White House protesting the potential of Leonard Peltier being freed. And you got to think about that, right? The President of the United States, now he's protected by the Secret Service, a very different agency, but to have thousands of FBI agents right outside the White House denouncing you. And lo and behold, Leonard Peltier was not freed. And it's interesting because as Obama was leaving office, many people speculated that a lot of people were going to get out of jail. And a lot of people did. Oscar Rivera Lopez, for example, a Puerto Rican political prisoner. He was freed, Oscar Rivera Lopez, and a lot of people were very happy about it. A whole score of nonviolent drug offenders were freed by Barack Obama. Chelsea Manning, the whistleblower, freed by Barack Obama. But Barack Obama, he didn't touch Leonard Peltier. Interesting. Interesting. The FBI is a peculiar institution, right? Now, there's no reason to say it's any different than any other, right? And that's one of the aspects I think that is unique about the United States at this time. Most countries, they have their secret service, they have their army, their military, they have, and they have their spying agencies, and that's it. In the USA, we've got the CIA and the NSA and the FBI and the Army intelligence and the Navy intelligence, and I can't even name them all. I don't even know all of them. That's how many people in the intelligence world we have, spy agents, right? And then police, right? Well, you got your local police, you got your state police. Every state has its own Bureau of Investigation, right? There's the NYBI, right? The New York Bureau of Investigation, right? There's the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, right? So that every state's got their own FBI, basically. They've got your state police. You got your Federal Bureau of Investigation. You got the other parts of the Justice Department. In addition to that, you've got the Secret Service. In addition to that, you've got the National Security Council. In addition to that, you've got the NYPD, which operates on a national level. I bet you didn't know that, right? The NYPD has been caught doing operations, anti-terrorism operations in Washington State, in all 50 states of the United States. The NYPD has a presence. The New York City Police Department, that is in charge of policing New York City, has a presence all over the country. And believe it or not, maybe I'll get some flack for saying this, the NYPD even has an office in Israel. Google it. The NYPD, the New York City Police Department, that has jurisdiction over one city, has an office in a foreign country, in Israel. And at police precincts, they actually have leaflets advertising the fact that the NYPD has an office in Israel. Just saying. Folks, the policing industry in the United States, the intelligence industry in the United States, the military apparatus in the United States, it's so big and vast. It's such a big part of the economy. These guys are competing with each other, right? And keep in mind, all of these agencies, all of them, contract private companies to do their work, especially their computer work, right? They've got cybersecurity firms and so all of these private agencies have their own people. They're all competing for a budget. They want federal money to come to them, not the other guys. Meanwhile, they're all contracting people. And they all want the federal money that's going to the agency that hires them to go to them and not the other contractors. And what we've got going on here is that the police state apparatus in the United States, in addition to the military-industrial complex, has gotten to be so big and so vast that it's fighting amongst itself. That seems to be what's going on here. Divisions of the U.S. state are disagreeing with each other about what the priorities should be. And this is getting to be quite interesting. There are contradictions within the state apparatus. In addition to that, we know that there are contradictions among the ruling class right now. The different corporations with different interests, the fracking companies versus big oil, Silicon Valley versus Wall Street, big banks versus tech companies. It's happening. Right? That there used to be some kind of like lockstep unity in the United States. Ronald Reagan used to say, we're all friends after 6, right? We're all friends after 6. We might be Democrats, we might be Republicans, we might scream at each other on the floor of Congress. We're all friends after 6. We all got the same goal. We all hate the Soviets. We all love American capitalism. We just want it to be operated in different ways. We have different policies. We're loyal to different private interests, but we're all friends after 6. We're all on the same team here. We're all pals. That used to be the terms in Washington, D.C. Right? We're all friends after 6. Not anymore. Not anymore. What they just did to Roger Stone? Yeah. They ain't all friends after 6. I'll tell you that much. There are real contradictions right now. The fact that that was done, the fact that the President of the United States got on social media and denounced the FBI for doing something? Yeah. Something's going on here, folks. There are contradictions within the circles of power within the United States. There are divisions within the ruling class. There are Bonapartist struggles taking place in the United States at this time. This is an aspect of capitalism in crisis. When the falling rate of profit, when the falling rate of profit takes effect in the aftermath of huge leaps in technology, and capitalists are not making profits, and wages are dropping, and products are not being sold, and the market is being glutted, there are divisions within the ruling class. And as the rulers of the world struggle for their control of different markets, and capitalists clash with one another to corner the markets and divide up the world, yes, we are in a period of capitalist crisis. This is not the normal operation, that post-World War II world that we all became accommodated to, that understanding of how capitalism worked in the American Dream era, where there were the hippies protesting, and there was anger and resentment among the African American community, but most of America was just randy dandy, all happy, and if you don't like it here, maybe you ought to move to some other country. That's over, folks. People are angry. People are angry on the left. People are angry on the right. People are angry in urban areas. People are angry in suburban areas. People are angry in rural areas. The people of the United States are in a fighting mood because hard times are fighting times. And politics is taking a very, very interesting turn. And on that note, I'm going to have some more orange juice. What an evening. Wow. Ugh. What's on people's minds here? I see Kinky is saying quite a bit. Oh, glad you're joining us. We're with us, Kinky. You're a long-time loyal fan. There's somebody named J.M. Clinton. I don't know who you are, but glad to have you with us. We're always glad to have people here. There's a guy named Ron. Welcome, Ron. Ronnie Miller's here, but there's also some guy named Ron Waganer or something like that. You're all friends here. Now, I wanted to talk. So Bernie Sanders is going to announce that he's running for president, right? He's a little old, but hey, people love him. People want to hear his message. He's going to be probably the most popular person who's announced that they're running. And I think that's interesting. And, the interesting thing about Bernie Sanders is that, Bernie Sanders calls himself a socialist. And that the Bernie Sanders phenomenon was very much a result of what happened during the Obama presidency, I think. During the Obama years, Obama was being called a socialist. He's a socialist, right? Go back to Joe the Plumber. Do you guys remember Joe the Plumber? And he said, oh, you're going to make my taxes go up. Hey, shout out to Felicity. Welcome to join us. Thank you, Felicity. I know you've been here. Just wanted to give you a shout out. Shout out to Lanza. But anyway, so back, during the Clinton era, during the Obama years, right, when Obama was running for president, you had this guy, Joe the Plumber, whose name was not Joe, and he was not a plumber, and he didn't actually have the tax, the income level he said he had, but whatever, right? So you had Joe the Plumber, and he was mad that Obama was going to make his taxes go up, and Obama said something like, well, we need to spread the wealth around, and everyone said, oh my God, Obama's a socialist, and I know you had Sarah Palin come out and say, Joe thought that sounded a little much like socialism, and, in the debates you had John McCain, and he was there, and he said, why would you do that to Joe? Why are you going to make the taxes go up on a hardworking guy like Joe the Plumber? It was a whole thing, right? So Obama was being called a socialist, and Obama was always saying that he wasn't a socialist. He's saying, no, I believe in capitalism. I just think we need social programs. The market isn't always the answer. He just kind of basic, Democratic Party. Maybe we ought to have some regulations, but not really. Then the Republicans were all talking that he's a socialist. And Glenn Beck had this show with a chalkboard where he was drawing on the chalkboard, and it was like, Barack Obama and SEIU Union and, Andy Stern and SDS and the Weathermen and Che Guevara and Adolf Hitler, and therefore Obama is Hitler. And it was this hysterical tone from the right wing. And it was pointed out that since about 2006, a member of the U.S. Senate named Bernie Sanders from Vermont was actually a socialist, right? Bernie Sanders was a senator, and he was, openly calling himself a socialist. He'd been kind of a figure in Vermont politics for decades, going back to the 80s. He was the mayor of Burlington. But, it would come out, people pointed out, well, there's actually a socialist in the U.S. Congress. And so this socialist guy in Vermont, who was kind of obscure before that, suddenly became a very, very well-known national figure. And they started having him on MSNBC. I know Ed Schultz of The Ed Show kind of, played a role in bringing Bernie Sanders into a more visual role. And all of a sudden, come 2016, Bernie Sanders is running for president. Running for president of the United States. And when Bernie Sanders was running for president, a lot of young people came to see him. And he had the biggest rallies. Hillary Clinton had the smallest rallies. Trump, he had pretty big rallies, but they were nowhere near as big as the Bernie Sanders rallies. I mean, people would pack arenas to see Bernie Sanders. And Bernie Sanders isn't that great of a speaker, but it's the message that people are attracted to. Bernie Sanders, people joke that he talks like he is screaming from the other side of a river. I believe that we should have richer taxes on big corporations. He's not like the most articulate, but people liked the message. It was just basic populism, right? Maybe the government ought to favor average people and not huge corporations. But what's interesting is Bernie Sanders was calling himself a socialist. And he would say things that were a little odd. Like, for example, one thing that Bernie Sanders often said is he would say, like, well, I'm not a socialist, I'm a democratic socialist, right? And that's a little bit strange because democratic seems to be, kind of implied with the socialism, and it's kind of an adjective. So you're a democratic socialist. That's saying, well, I'm not a trucker. I'm a red-haired trucker. I'm not a bicycle fan. I'm an enthusiastic bicycle fan. It's a little odd. And then in one of the debates with Hillary Clinton, he actually said that his vision of democratic socialism was not contrary to capitalism, that there is no contradiction between democratic socialism and capitalism. And so then there became this kind of confusion. And I think, I was too critical at first of Bernie Sanders. I think that his movement was a good thing. It was a very, very good thing. And, the policies he advocated, I think are great. I'm not opposed to the policies he advocated. The economic policies, raise the minimum wage, give people health care, give people education. I'm for it. However, that's not socialism, right? Socialism is the opposite of capitalism. Capitalism is a system where the banks, factories, and industries are organized to serve the profits of a group of owners. That's what capitalism is. And socialism is when the banks, factories, and industries are organized to serve public good, when the government and the state plans the economy in order to make a better life for the people. That's the difference between socialism and capitalism. Every government in the world redistributes wealth, right? Sometimes they distribute it to the top, to the big corporations. Sometimes they distribute it to working families. You have things like food stamps that are subsidies to big business by helping people buy food. And actually, Ronnie Miller is saying Bernie Sanders is more of a social democrat. Well, actually, even if you want to follow the strict definition, he's not a social democrat, right? Social democracy, right? If you want to get really technical here, right? So, in people who want to overthrow capitalism, organized leftists, you have three categories, right? You have social democrats. And social democrats want a socialist planned economy. They just see it as an outgrowth of capitalism. They see it coming gradually. They see it as the sum of reforms, right? Social democracy is Edward Bernstein, right? Social democracy is the Second International, the British Labour Party, the German Social Democratic Party, the French Socialist Party, right? It's the idea that, well, one day we're going to nationalize this, one day we're going to give a minimum wage. I know in some Scandinavian countries, they had a plan where workers were taxed, and some of the money of the workers would actually go into a savings account, so eventually they could buy the factory that they worked in from their boss. It's this idea that socialism, the planned economy that serves working families, eventually comes as an outgrowth of capitalism, right? That as capitalism becomes more and more democratic, gradually, one step at a time, you have socialism. That's what social democracy is, right? It's not a bigger welfare state. It's this belief that gradually, one step at a time, you'll get to socialism, right? Now, Marxism or communism or revolutionary socialism, or whatever you want to call it, Bolshevism, the stuff that we saw during the 20th century, the stuff that we're seeing today in Venezuela, the stuff, that is different. And it's not different. People say, well, it's different because they want a violent revolution. No, that's not the issue, right? That serious revolutionaries never would call for a violent revolution. They would never favor that, right? That only crazy ultra-left adventurists would go around saying, I want a violent revolution. No, in reality, the difference is that while social democrats view capitalism as just kind of naturally gradually evolving into socialism, that communists, Marxist-Leninists, Marxists, they say that there becomes a crisis. And during that crisis, there emerges different poles within society, and that eventually there needs to be a seizure of the state, right? The state needs to come into the hands of the people, and that there's an event horizon, there's a line. One day, it's a capitalist government. The next day, it's a socialist government, right? That there is a seizure of power. And that happened, that happened in every revolution. And there have been a lot of violent revolutions, but socialist Marxists would always prefer, serious revolutionaries would always prefer a nonviolent revolution. However, the ruling class generally makes that impossible. They tend to be very, very violent in order to preserve their system, and they start attacking people and killing people, and eventually, the people are forced to take up arms to defend themselves, and violent revolutions happen. But Marxists don't want a violent revolution. The capitalists do. And unfortunately, people are forced to defend themselves, and most of the time there have been violent revolutions. I mean, even Venezuela, right? It was a peaceful seizure of power. It's been a peaceful revolution, but at this point, they're having to defend themselves, and they're locked and loaded and armed, and they got militias and all that, right? That these things happen. So that's the difference between social democracy and revolutionary Marxism or communism. And then anarchism is a totally different animal. Anarchism says that socialism should be created without coercion, right? Without, it's the idea is we're just going to build our little food co-op, and we're going to build our little communes, and the system is going to crash and burn, and we're going to build voluntary associations. You have like anarcho-syndicalism. That's the idea that workers should control their factories, but there shouldn't be a state central plan. You've got, there's different wings of anarchism, or what they say there shouldn't be a state. There should just be, like Bakunin talked about, there should be this thing called the association that makes sure that no new state comes in but doesn't do anything else. The anarchism is a completely different animal. They don't believe in using the state and using politics or state power to create socialism and to create ultimately communism, right? They favor a kind of stateless socialism, a voluntarist socialism, right? So those are the three schools of leftist thought. Bernie Sanders does not agree with any of those schools of leftist thought. At one point, he may have agreed with social democracy. I know that he was linked to the Socialist Workers' Party. He was like a delegate for them during the 1970s. But at this point, he's very clear. He doesn't want the means of production to be controlled by the state. He doesn't want a state-run economy. And that his vision of what he calls democratic socialism is simply a European welfare state. He wants, more of a European welfare state. I would be for more of a European welfare state, but I'm also a socialist. I think the banks, factories, and industries should be run by the people. And someone's saying here that Bernie Sanders is a war hawk. Sure, I don't agree with Bernie Sanders' foreign policy on a lot of issues, And I would say, interestingly, that a lot of social democrats, actual social democrats, have had problematic views on foreign policy. The British Labour Party, long before they got rid of Clause 4, when they were the ruling party of Britain in the 70s and the 60s, they were doing all kinds of military interventions in Africa, and they were war hawks too, and they were talking socialism while they were war hawks. There's a whole history of social democratic war hawks, of people leading imperialist countries saying that they eventually want to get to a workers' paradise and leading people to war. And interestingly, that actually brings me to the next topic I wanted to talk about, which is the anniversary, right? People probably saw all over Left Book that there was an anniversary recently for the Spartacusbund, or the Spartacist uprising of Germany in 1919. I don't know if people saw that. But in 1919, there was a failed revolution in Germany. And it was led by Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, two German communists, Marxists, and it failed. And it's interesting because in left-wing circles, everyone kind of knows that they're supposed to like Rosa Luxemburg, right? And because, and to be fair, she is a woman, right? And there's not many prominent Marxist women from that time period. And she died, gave her life for her beliefs. And so there's a lot of people who, they hear the name Rosa Luxemburg and they cross themselves almost. It's like a holy name in lefty circles. I notice nobody knows anything about those events. And it surprises me. People just know that there was this revolutionary woman. She was in Germany. She was Polish. And there was an uprising and it failed. And eventually Hitler came in. And it's like Hitler didn't come in until 1933. So you're way behind. But let's get to that. Because it's interesting. Because I've seen a lot of commemorations for Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht. And all of them completely miss the point. And they give bad conclusions. There's a way that Marxists generally talk about the events of 1919 in Germany, and talking about them that way at this point is just completely wrong. So let me back up. All right, Germany, World War One. When World War I broke out in Germany, at that point there was a huge institution. The biggest Marxist party in the world prior to World War I was in Germany. It was called the Social Democratic Party. And actually, I don't know if folks have ever read, Karl Marx wrote a pamphlet, Critique of the Goethe Program. Well, that was about the founding meeting of the German Social Democratic Party. It goes back that far. And the German Social Democratic Party was the Marxist party. It was led by Karl Kautsky. He was their theoretician and ideological leader, and it was millions and millions of people. And they believed in socialism, and they had seats in the parliament, and they controlled the trade unions, and they were Marxists. And Lenin admired them in a lot of ways. Lenin was constantly quoting Kautsky and talking about Kautsky, and they were Marxists, and they were even critical of a lot of the reformism of social democracy in a lot of ways. They were not completely reformist. In a lot of ways, they did a lot of things, and they were huge. I mean, you wouldn't believe, I mean, they had, like Marxist choirs that people sang in. They had Marxist sports leagues that played soccer. They had, Marxist summer camps for little kids to go to. It was a big deal. It was a very significant percentage of German society was in or around the German Social Democratic Party. It was huge. Marxism was a big, big part of German civil discourse, and the German Social Democratic Party was a massive institution. I mean, a very big percentage of the parliament. I mean, whole neighborhoods and communities they controlled. Much bigger than the German Communist Party was later. I mean, it was a thing. I mean, it was on the level of like the British Labour Party is today, right? Which is just like the main left-wing party in the government, right? That was German Social Democratic Party. Karl Kautsky, as Thomas Torrance is pointing out, he even published the 4th volume of Capital. Karl Kautsky was Mr. Marxism. German social democracy was an institution in Germany. And then World War I came along. And the German Social Democrats had promised that they would never support a war. They would always be internationalists. It would always be workers of the world unite. And then World War I came along and they made excuses. And they supported World War I. And they sold out, basically. They sold out. They supported World War I. And a lot of German Marxists didn't support World War I. And they were opposed to World War I. And they actually formed the German Independent Social Democratic Party to split, to oppose World War I. And Germany, it became a militarized, it went to World War I. Millions of people were dying and suffering and dying. And World War I was happening, and people were demoralized. And eventually the United States got involved, and there's the Russian Revolution. Lo and behold, around 1918, World War I came to an end. And as World War I was ending, the Kaiser ordered the German Navy to basically commit suicide. To, just go have one last mission and die before we surrender. And the German Navy officers said, geez, the war's about to be over anyway. I don't think we're going to do that. And they rose up and took control of their ships. And then the military, there was uprisings. And then pretty soon, workers' councils were springing up in cities. And whole areas were taken control of. And workers it was a revolution. There was a German revolution that took place at the end of World War I. The Kaiser was forced to step down. It was a widespread revolt of soldiers turning their guns around and refusing to fight for the government. And as World War I ended, the German government collapsed. And at that point, the Social Democratic Party and the Independent Social Democratic Party, which had opposed World War I, they were the main party that represented leftism. And most of the German workers who had brought down the German government and refused to fight in World War I and rose up, most of them were Marxists, more or less, right? They said, hey, look, the Kaiser is tied in with the big bankers and capitalists. We've been ripped off. We've been sent to die in a boss's war. We ain't going to have it. And so the Marxists had their moment. They were brought into power, and they came to power. The Social Democratic Party was in there, and they were running the country. They were in there, and the question became, are we going to create a socialist Germany, or are we going to create a bourgeois democratic Germany? And folks are probably very familiar with what's called the Weimar Republic, because the Social Democratic Party, led by Marxists, took power in Germany, had a constitutional assembly and did not create socialism in Germany. They created the Weimar Republic, which was capitalist. It was a capitalist constitution. It was a capitalist democracy. They did not create socialism in Germany. They didn't, right? They were brought to power. The revolution happened. The moment that they had been waiting for, the moment that Marx basically predicts at the end of the Communist Manifesto, when he says, and we turn now to Germany. That's like, look at like the third paragraph from the end of the Communist Manifesto. Karl Marx is talking about Germany. It happened. The Götterdämmerung had arrived, right? The twilight of the gods. Capitalism had fallen. The Kaiser had stepped down. The end of a war. As Germany was losing a war, the soldiers said, we will not fight a boss's war. They brought the government down. They came to power, and they elected socialist leaders, and the socialist leaders went in there, and what did they do? They created capitalism. Right? That's what happened. They created capitalism. The Weimar Republic was a capitalist government that they created. And they said, well, you know, if people want to vote for a socialist party, that's fine. We'll enact Marxist policies if we're elected. We're not going to do what the Bolsheviks did. And Karl Kautsky wrote a pamphlet denouncing the Bolsheviks, calling them terrorists, saying they're engaged in red terror and authoritarianism and that they were extremists. So Lenin wrote a pamphlet in response to Karl Kautsky called Proletarian Revolution and the Renegade Kautsky. And the Social Democratic Party, the Marxists, created capitalism. So Rosa Luxemburg and her partner Karl Liebknecht, they formed an institution called the Spartacus Bund, or Spartacus League, named after Spartacus, the leader of the ancient Roman slave revolt. And they said, we're not going to stop fighting. We are going to fight for continuing a revolution. And so they published this pamphlet, this beautiful pamphlet you can read called What the Spartacus League Wants. Check it out. It's a very, very well-written pamphlet. What the Spartacus League wants. They say what they want, right? They want a socialist government for the people. You read it. It's a very, very fiery, exciting pamphlet. What the Spartacus League wants, and that the Social Democratic Party of Germany has sold out the revolution. They've created capitalism. So the Spartacus Bund, they rose up. And so the Social Democrats, who were Marxists, they called themselves Marxists, teamed up with what they called the Freikorps. And the Freikorps were right-wing soldiers who didn't agree with the surrender during World War I. And, together, the Social Democratic Party and the Freikorps came together and they smashed the Spartacist uprising. And they killed Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht. And they killed a lot of the communist rebels that came together. And they made sure that there would not be a socialist revolution in Germany. And the reason that Germany did not have a socialist revolution after World War I was not because of capitalists. It was because of fake socialists. It was because of the betrayal of social democracy, right? And there's a lot written about why that was. There's a pamphlet called The Failure of a Revolution. There's a lot, Lenin wrote about, it's a topic people have studied quite a bit, but again, in the USA, no one knows anything about it. And, why was there no revolution in the aftermath of World War I? Well, the reason was that the German Social Democratic Party had too much to lose, right? They had become an institution under capitalism. They controlled huge trade unions. They controlled huge seats in parliament. And revolutions tend to involve risks. And if they had, written a socialist constitution for Germany, there was a chance that they would be invaded, just like Russia was after World War I, after the Russian Revolution. And there's a chance they could lose it all. And they didn't want to take the risks. They were too tied to the order as it was. They had the huge kindergartens and the huge choirs and the huge labor unions that they controlled. And they didn't want to take the risks necessary to come to power and actually build socialism in Germany. It was too risky. And it was like gambling, right? They had so much money that they didn't want to go all in. That's what happened, right? And Lenin in Russia, the Bolsheviks, they didn't have a lot under the old system. They did have seats in the Tsarist Duma, but not real representation. And they were not based in communities. They were a party of new type. They were a conspiratorial underground party. And so, Lenin, argued that, that this proved that the Bolshevik political model was best, right? And that the party of a new type, a party that is obsessed with revolution and doesn't want to build up an apparatus under capitalism, is what's needed. And a lot of Marxists, most people that have been writing about Rosa Luxemburg and what went on, most of those people that have been studying that and been studying these events, they just leave it there. They say, see, this proves that we shouldn't have big socialist, sports leagues. We shouldn't have big socialist choirs. We shouldn't control trade unions. We shouldn't run for office. We should just build some kind of revolutionary party that screams revolution. And, they're missing the point, okay? They're missing the point entirely, all right? Because the United States in 2016 is nothing like Germany in 1918. We do not have millions and millions of people in a mass socialist movement. We do not have huge socialist sports leagues and kindergartens and choirs. We don't control whole neighborhoods. We don't have trade. I mean, that's not the situation at all. There's very, very little socialist consciousness in the United States at this time. It's very, very low. Not a lot of people understand basic socialist arguments. That's why these lives are so unique, because you don't hear what I'm saying. So the idea that yes, you're right, we shouldn't try to build mass socialist consciousness. No, that's completely wrong, right? We have the opposite problem. We have the opposite problem that the Germans had in 1918, right? The Germans, yes, they had built this huge social democratic institution under capitalism that got a little bit too powerful, had too much to lose, was too heavily influenced by high-paid workers and by teachers and by professors and people that were not from the working class, and it had too much to lose, and a revolutionary situation arose, and they didn't take the risks. That's the problem they had in Germany in 1918. That's nothing like what we're having right here, right? That is nothing like the problems that we're having in the United States. Right now in the United States, most people think that socialism is the post office. Okay? Bernie Sanders is running for president as a socialist, saying he wants us to have guaranteed health care like they have in every other industrial country in the world. People have no clue about basic Marxist ideology. The idea that we should avoid trying to build a mass workers, movement. We should avoid trying to popularize these ideas and instead focus on building a vanguard party of the new time. I mean, that's kind of the opposite. We've got a million vanguard parties of a new type. We got the RCP and the SWP and the QWH and the XYZ and the 12th International and the 4th Committee of the 16th International and oh my God, you go to one of these like labor rallies and you got the Spartacus League and the 4th Internationalist Vanguards and oh my God, we got more people doing we got more people LARPing. Live action role play, LARPing, pretending they're Bolsheviks than we ever needed. What we don't have is mass socialist consciousness, right? People in the United States don't know about socialism. It's the opposite, right? It is the opposite, right? So to look at Rosa Luxemburg and to say, aha, that proves we shouldn't try to build a mass no. And the reason that people are tempted to say that, I must say, because even in the 1930s, the Communist Party was very tied in with the Soviet Union. They very much, looked to the Soviet Union for inspiration. Even then, the Soviet Union, they built the Young Pioneers, clubs. Noam Chomsky always talks about his parents joined the Communist Party because they had, a baseball team that girls could play baseball. It was like they had community organizations. The Communist Party was a mass party in the United States, right? The reason that people like to fetishize Rosa Luxemburg's, and this proves that you shouldn't have a mass party like the SPD. The reason for that is because during the 1970s, the new communist movement was unable to set up a base, right? The 1970s, when the USA's economy was still big, when you still had a big industrial working class, you had a lot of, burned out 60s radicals who, after the 60s ended, they went and got jobs in factories and tried to recruit their co-workers to the Communist Workers' Party or the RCP or the October League or the Socialist Workers' Party or the Workers' World Party or whatever, and it didn't work. People just didn't want to hear it, right? And then Reaganism came in at the end of the 1970s, early 80s, and basically there was this great retreat where what you call the new communist movement basically declared that it can't be done, right? Average workers in the USA are just too bought off. They're too bourgeoisified. They're labor aristocrats. They don't want to hear it. And so they just kind of gave up on the broad masses of people in the United States. And as a result of that, all the kind of baby boomers that are leading the American Communist parties have basically stuck with what they learned in the 1970s, that, average Americans, your typical suburban or rural white Americans, are just incapable of being won over to Marxist ideology. They'll never be convinced. It'll just never happen, right? That's what your typical group. And so all the groups do stuff. I mean, there's groups that are focused on trying to organize against police brutality in the black community. That's not something I oppose. I think police brutality is an awful thing. I believe in civil liberties. There's groups that are on the campuses trying to recruit college students. There are groups that, that are trying to work within the labor unions and try to like maneuver within the bureaucracy. But nobody is doing what the Communist Party did in the 30s or what Eugene V. Debs did in the 1920 or the 19 teens and before that, and going to average people and saying, hey, capitalism is the problem, and the banks, factories, and industries ought to be controlled by the people. No one's doing that. No one does that anymore. And the reason they don't do it is because in the 70s, all these 60s radicals learned that it can't be done. But the thing is, the world has changed since the 1970s. In the 1970s, it could not be done. You're right. The economy was just too good. Average Americans didn't want to hear it. Detroit, you had, the new communist movement made some really big inroads. Georgia, some other places, but overall, average Americans didn't want to hear it. But since then, the U.S. economy has really collapsed, right? The industrial middle class is decaying. Socialism is more popular than ever before. People are packing into Bernie Sanders rallies. There's a whole generation of young people that don't have that Red Scare stigma of anti-communism. And it's possible. You can go and win people. I've done it. I've spent so many hours of my adult life trying to sell people newspapers and talk to people about socialism, and it's not that hard to do. And nobody does it. All the groups, they don't do it. They all do something else. They all have this other thing that they do. They don't go out and just try to win people over to socialist ideas. And that's a problem. And that's what needs to be done. There needs to be a socialist community in the United States. I'm not talking about a political party. I'm not a political activist. I don't engage in the political process. I'm a journalist and political analyst. But socialist ideas, Marxist concepts, the concept of the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, the workers and the bosses, the concept of capitalism creating overproduction, the understanding that we need a government of action that will fight for working families. That is absent from the discourse. Socialist ideas are not out there. People have no clue what socialists believe. People think that socialism means everyone gets paid the same wage no matter how hard they work. People think that, I had somebody in my high school tell me, communism is when the government kills people. I said, really? She said, yes. We executed Timothy McVeigh. That was communism, right? It's like people have no clue, right? I'm in the subways here in New York City, in Brooklyn. I cannot go by one single day without seeing somebody out there from the Jehovah's Witnesses trying to sell me, promote the Watchtower. My vision, I want someday when I get on the subway to see communists trying to sell me their publication and tell me about how capitalism is the problem. Socialist consciousness needs to be all over U.S. society because it's the only way out, right? The problem that we have right now is a capitalist problem, and it can be only resolved if we have a government that fights for the people and moves the country towards socialism. Right? We need to have a government that controls the economy to make a good life for the people. We can't have the free market. There is no free market way out of the crisis that we are in at this time. There is no way out as long as profits are in command. There needs to be a government of action to fight for working families. And that's what's missing in all of this. So people who want to look at Rosa Luxemburg and say, the Spartacist revolt and the German Revolution, they're missing the point. They're missing the point. And I will say this, and this needs to be thrown out there. A lot of people look at what's going on right now with Trump, and they say, oh my God, it's going to be Nazi Germany again. Pretty soon they're going to start putting us in concentration camps. We're all going to die. It's the end of the world. Well, let's review a little German history, right? Hitler came in 1933. In 1918, there was a socialist revolution in Germany that did not create socialism. The socialists were brought to power in a mass uprising that brought down the Kaiser and didn't create socialism. And then there were uprisings all throughout the 20s. There was the Bavarian Soviet Republic at one point. You had different regions in Germany. You had in Red May, I believe it was 1920, 28, 29. You had this in Wedding in Germany where they seized it, like a chunk of Berlin. There were communist uprisings all throughout the 1920s, and they didn't win. They didn't work. They didn't take power, and they didn't make people's lives better. And after a decade or so, people said, okay, the left, you've had your chance. You haven't taken power. You've been fighting in the streets, and a lot of people have been dying, and people are still hungry and starving. And, and there's this right-wing party, the Nazis, that they seem to be, having their stuff together. The right took power after the left was unable to take power, right? And that's what happened. It wasn't, people have this narrative in their heads like, well, first, the government, regulated television and then the government did this. No, it wasn't like that at all, right? That there was an armed battle. There were armed battles going on in the streets for like a decade between communists and Freikorps and far-rightists, and eventually the Hitler-Nazi party took power. And even the Nazi party had a lot of, there were a lot of like weird right-wing groups that didn't like the Nazis and had falling outs with them and merged with them. And it's way complicated. It's very, very, very complicated. And in Germany, you had this individual, even the communists over there was a guy named Brandler, I believe, and there was like an attempted armed uprising in Germany in like the mid-20s with this guy named Brandler, and he eventually started his own party, the Brandlerites, and there was a weird, it was very complicated. And a lot of people point out that if the German Social Democrats and communists had voted together, had blocked together in the elections, they could have prevented Hitler from coming to power. And a lot of people will say, oh, why didn't they just do that? Well, I'll tell you why. Because the Freikorps and the Social Democrats had murdered Rosa Luxemburg. And there was some pretty bad blood. And all throughout the 1920s, as there were revolts going on, all throughout the 1920s, communist revolts, a lot of times the people sent to crush those communist revolts were Social Democrats. The communists and the Social Democrats in Germany were killing each other, literally killing each other. These folks were blood enemies. The idea that they were just going to, all vote in one block, that wasn't going to happen. It just wasn't going to happen. The leader of the German Communist Party during the 20s and 30s was a guy named Ernst Thälmann. He became kind of a martyr for world communism. They actually had a song, Ernst Thälmann, he was out in front, his fist was raised to strike them. The flag was, the brigades were forming thick and fast to raise the battle forward. The flag was red, the fight was on, for sturdy comrade Thälmann, raise your fist. And it was like, sound the alarm, the phony court has sentenced him to perish. But news must spread throughout the world to keep our brother free. I don't remember all the, but it was Ernst Thälmann. He was the leader of the German communists. Hitler arrested him when he first came into power, and all over the world, there were free Ernst Thälmann. It was a big thing. They had strikes and protests for Ernst Thälmann. And eventually Hitler executed Ernst Thälmann, and there was protests in Germany. People went out on strike, and then after, when East Germany was created, Ernst Thälmann was the martyr, and there was the Thälmann song, or the Thälmann Lied, that was one of the official anthems of East Germany. German communism is worth studying. I was obsessed with it at one point because there's so little about it in English. I would go and just dig up any book on Weimar Germany and all of that. But I've come to the conclusion that we're not living in those times. We are just not. Those were times of mass socialist consciousness, and there were times where the socialist movement was massive and huge and wasn't able to take power. Now, Joker is asking me, what do you think of a fully automated luxury communism and a government run by artificial intelligence? Well, that's interesting because, there's a writer that I like named Nelson Peary. And he wrote a book called The Future is Up to Us, which I really like. And Nelson Peary talks about how, that before there can be that revolutions basically come in three stages. First, you have a technological revolution. Then you have a social revolution. And then the social revolution becomes a political revolution. And that basically we're in the middle of a technological revolution. The computer revolution is a technological revolution. And the technological revolution is creating the economic revolution. It's creating a new class, right? What you might call, the underclass, right? Because there's no longer industrial workers. With AI, with artificial intelligence, you don't need industrial workers anymore. You don't need factory assembly line workers. You just don't, right? They have no purpose in the economy, right? 3D printers, the idea that we're going to have people working on assembly lines making stuff just ain't going to happen. So that creates this permanent underclass of people that the only way they can basically survive is by, having an economy that functions to serve human needs and not profits. Because as long as the economy is centered around serving human need, they're not going to have a place, or serving profits, they're not going to have a place in it. And they're not going to be able to buy back the products that are created. The problem of overproduction takes, Marx wrote about it, just about how they would make capitalism more and more efficient. Right? That the capitalist is constantly trying to look to advance technology and make production more efficient. We're at the point where they're just basically eliminating the role of labor. And because of that, that creates the necessity, that creates a new class of people that have no role in production, and as a result, ultimately have to fight for communism. I like Nelson Peary, and that Nelson Peary, he talks about how basically, during the let's back up, right? So we know that according to the Marxist understanding of human history, like Nelson Peary writes, first you have the technological revolution, and the first technological revolution is when we were hunter-gatherers. When we were a hunter-gatherer civilization, we developed spears, right? So we could hunt animals much more efficiently. And we started following patterns in how plants grew so we could gather fruits and nuts and vegetation much more efficiently. That was a technological revolution. That then created mass scarcity, right? And so the only way humans could survive, because we were so good at hunting and gathering, we were too good at it, so there was a shortage of animals to hunt, there was a shortage of nuts and fruits to gather. As a result, the only way we could survive was by, carrying out an economic revolution, and that was by agriculture, right? Started growing our own animals, started growing our own crops. And then ultimately, in order to facilitate that, we got a higher stage of politics. We got the political systems of feudalism and slavery emerged in the aftermath of the economic revolution, right? Speed ahead, right? Under feudalism, you have an economic revolution. You have the Silk Road coming in from Asia, bringing in all kinds of new technology, and world trade is coming in. You've got the printing press, and then you've got the Silk Road, and you've got a new class, of merchants, right? And that new class of merchants begins to carry out an economic revolution. They create a marketplace, a global marketplace. Trade is coming in. This new class of merchants comes in. They're neither peasants nor landowners. They're not serfs or nobles, right? They're capitalists, basically. They're selling stuff, making a profit, right? So this new class of merchants comes in. You get money lending and banking, and they come in, and that's an economic revolution. And eventually, they are the most powerful class, so they overthrow the kings. And so you have a political revolution, and that's the birth of modern nation states and capitalism, right? But the problem in the 20th century is this. If you look back during feudalism, all throughout feudalism, there were many times that peasants just couldn't take it anymore, whether they were being starved or being oppressed by their local nobles, and they rose up. And they said, I am not going to... There were the German peasant wars of Germany. They were, all throughout Chinese history, almost every few generations, they had another peasant uprising, where the peasants would rise up and seize control. And a lot of times they would create these kind of like communistic or socialistic communes even, right? There's a whole history of peasants rising up. But eventually, after a little bit, feudalism would overtake them, because feudalism is a much more efficient way of running subsistence farming. An agriculture subsistence farming economy is much more efficient if you operate it under feudalism, right? Feudalism is a much more efficient way of doing it. A communistic commune, it's only going to last for so long. The feudalist commune, areas are going to retake it because they can run subsistence farming better. And if you look at what happened in the 20th century with socialism, it's basically a lot like those communes, right? People rose up and took control of the means of production. Workers just couldn't take it anymore. Countries were being held into poverty by imperialism. So workers rose up, and you had socialist revolutions in the developing world in which they took control of the capitalist means of production and operated them according to a central plan. You had socialism created, but it was on the basis of a capitalist economy. Right? It was not a new stage in human development. It was capitalist production. It was steel mills and factories run on a socialist basis, but it was the same mode of production. The steel mills in the United States operated in the same way the steel mills in the Soviet Union operated. Same technology and all of that, just organized to serve society, not profits. So ultimately, it was not actually a higher stage in human development. It was the capitalist mode of production organized in a socialist way. But what the computer revolution is doing is the computer revolution is creating a technological revolution, right? It's getting rid of the need for industrial labor. And that is then creating a new class, a group of people who used to be industrial workers that now have no role in the capitalist economy. And ultimately, that new class will have no choice but to rise up and build socialism. It's socialism or death for them. That's why all the capitalists are at this point talking about one of the favored topics of the capitalists at this point is overpopulation. There's just too many people in the world. No, there's not too many people. There's too few places in their economy, right? And capitalism, the working class can only live so long as it works, and it can only work so long as its labor produces profits for a capitalist. And as a result of that contradiction, right? As a result of that problem, right, we have millions of people that are outcast and starving. So the capitalists are saying, what are we doing? There's all these people, right, that we can't make a profit from hiring, and they're too poor to buy stuff, so they have no role. And they think overpopulation is the issue. But ultimately, the issue is that we need a rationally planned economy, right? That we need an economic model that fits artificial intelligence, that fits what you're talking about. You're talking about luxury communism, higher modes of production, advanced technology. Well, we need an economic system where production is not carried out to make profits for a few. Production is carried out in order to serve social good. We need a government of action that fights for working families, that controls the economy in order to serve public good. And that the technological revolution of computers is making it a necessity, right? There was an economic revolution to create feudalism and slavery. There was an economic revolution to create capitalism, but there was not an economic revolution to create socialism. Developing countries that were kept in a state of chronic underdevelopment, like Russia, like Latin America, like China, they seized control of their economies in order to plan the economy. That's what happened in the 20th century, right? But now we're seeing the beginning of a different situation entirely. That there can actually be a higher stage of human development based on social control of the means of production necessitated by the computer revolution. And I love Nelson Peary. I never met Nelson Peary, and I have nothing to do with the organization he started. And I wanted to throw that out there. You know, it's interesting. This clown, what is his name? Trevor Loudon, right? He's this New Zealand guy who's a right-winger. He doesn't, like, this guy has just, like, I mean, it's kind of frustrating to me because it's like, this is a guy who's like, thinks he's an expert on communism. He does Key Wiki, and he's one of these right-wing guys. Trevor Loudon. And he wrote an article for the Epoch Times, LOL, the Epoch Times, which is run by the kooky Falun Gong cult. That's people that think they have a magical wheel in their stomach and are spreading discredited conspiracy theories about the Chinese government and are, I mean, it's just a kooky cult. I mean, they want to execute homosexuals, and I mean, they're just, you know, you can read about them. They're not a nice group of folks, against interracial marriage, and, you know, just not a nice group of folks. But anyway, the Epoch Times published an article by this raving anti-communist Trevor Loudon. And Trevor Loudon, you know, he made a documentary at one point trying to say that I was the leader of the Stop Trump protest movement. You know, I clearly wasn't. In fact, I've been one of the harshest critics of the Stop Trump movement. But regardless, so Trevor Loudon was wrong about that. So he wrote an article last week, and it was called A Guide to American Communist Parties. And they mentioned me in the article. But it says that I'm part of a socialist group called the League of Revolutionaries for a New America, LRNA. I'm not part of LRNA. I'm not. I never have been. And, that's Nelson Peary's group. And I like Nelson Peary. I think that his economic theories are correct. I have nothing to do with LRNA. I really have nothing to do with LRNA. The closest I ever had to do with LRNA is when I was doing an internship in Detroit, and I was fighting against home foreclosures. The office that I worked at, down the hall from me, there was an office that I think some LRNA people were at. But that was it. I mean, I've never been part of LRNA. And, you know, what I advocate personally, what I think needs to be done, is that we need to build socialist consciousness among the population, right? And my understanding of what LRNA does is that they do differently than that. LRNA is about, you know, building poverty programs and caring for people and trying to build kind of an apparatus to care for people who are suffering. That's very noble. I'm not opposed to that. Not opposed to it at all. It's very noble. I know there's a lot of really good people in Lerna who do a lot to help, low-income folks and fight for their food stamps and their welfare rights, and they run a lot of very good poverty programs. That's not what I do. So I wouldn't have a place in Lerna, even if I wanted to be in Lerna. I think if I showed up to Lerna and said, hey, I'd like to join your organization, they probably would say no to me. And I'm a journalist and political analyst. I can't be in any organization. I'm not part of any political organization at this time. I'm not a political activist. I am not a lobbyist. I believe in socialism. I'm very vocal about my own personal views, and I do a lot of journalism and analysis, but I'm not a political organizer. I'm not a political activist. And I want to be very clear about that. And I'm not in Lerna. I'm not part of the League of Revolutionaries for a New America. And I'm a little bit, frustrated because it's like, this Trevor Loudon guy seems to be really interested in me. He seems to, it's like he's sitting there like he's like a detective, like, aha, I have discovered the vast communist plot against America, and Caleb is at the center of it. He is the leader of the Stop Trump protest movement. Mwah, yes. Well, I'm not a leader of the Stop Trump protest movement. In fact, I wrote a big critique of the Stop Trump protest movement on January 20th and was widely criticized for it. I've actually been told, I've gotten a lot of threats. It makes me nervous every time I go to an anti-Trump rally if I have to cover it for my job and interview people, because I've had a lot of people tell me if I go to the Antifa is going to beat me up because I debated Augustus Sol Invictus. I'm not well loved among the Stop Trump protest movement at all. And honestly, I think the Stop Trump movement is not good. It's coming from a more pro-war section of the American elite who just fear they can't control Trump. But that's a whole other conversation. So he got wrong on that one. His little documentary where I was the boogeyman leading the Stop Trump protests, he's wrong on that. In fact, Trump slipped and called me his favorite reporter. I'm sure it was an accident. There's a clip of that on the internet. I opposed the January 20th protests. He said I was in charge of. I had nothing to do with it. I haven't been with Workers' World Party in a long time, and they are not my biggest fans. I understand they ain't doing too well these days. That's all I'll say about that. But, definitely not part of the Stop Trump movement. Definitely not part of the Workers' World Party. Haven't been for a long time. Was, very central in that organization at one point. But I've never been with Lerna. And I like Nelson Peary, the founder of their group. He died. His writing is amazing. I really, really like his writing. I think it's inspiring stuff. But and I learned a lot from Nelson Peary. But ultimately, I'm not in Lerna, and I don't. I believe in preaching socialism. I think people need socialist ideas, and I'm not a political activist. I'm a journalist, I'm an analyst, I'm a writer, so I'm just not part of Lerna. And so he got it wrong again. Next time I'm going to turn around, he's going to probably say I'm like the king of North Korea or something. Trevor Loudon is just full of it. And I think it's funny, in one of his documentaries, he's like interviewing somebody about me, and he's like, yes, there's Caleb Maupin. And I'm like, my name is not Maupin. You know what I mean? It's there's an A in there, Trevor. There's an A in my name. But whatever. It's Trevor Loudon. One of the articles he wrote for Epoch Times was arguing that like there was some Communist Party USA member who was running for local office in Texas. And he's arguing that they should be arrested under some obscure law in Texas from the 1950s that says it's illegal to be a communist or something. Like, this guy's a nut. He's just a raving anti-communist nut. And he's not actually taken seriously in right-wing circles, I know, because of, in the kind of work I do, I know Trump-supporting people, and I've asked them about Trevor Loudon, and most, like, standard Fox News Republican kind of folks, they laugh at Trevor Loudon. He's not taken seriously. He's on the level of that Vladimir Jaffe fellow, right, who walks around and walks up to people with a camera and says, communism killed millions of people, yes? Really? He's like on that level, right? You got Vladimir Jaffe walking around, running up to random communists in the streets and saying, you're a communist, you killed millions of people, really? And then you've got Trevor Loudon saying, yes, Caleb Maupin is at the center of the vast communist conspiracy against New Zealand. It makes me angry. It's like this. These people, even in right-wing circles, right? Even among these people that love Dinesh D'Souza and PragerU and think that Tucker Carlson is the man, even they don't take these guys seriously. These guys are viewed as kind of the tinfoil hat 1950s Joe McCarthy reenactment squad that is kind of laughed at. If you look at like the workshops Trevor Loudon has at CPAC, they ain't too big. from what I understand. But I'm not part of that world. I'm not a conservative. But I just think it's odd. So I wonder what he's going to say I am next. I mean, maybe his next article will be about how I'm secretly the king of North Korea. But whatever, whatever. Crazy evening. But I'm having a great time talking to you all. Someone said it's been over 2 hours. Yes, it has. But I promised you it would be a full live tonight, and it is. And I've got plenty of orange juice here, but I'm only going to go for a little while longer. Because it's been a long night, and, I mean, a lot happening in the world. Got more Beethoven to listen to. So what else is on people's minds? Anything you want me to touch on before I end for the evening? Anything, folks. I'm standing by. Anything you want me to comment on, I'm happy to talk. Well, I see someone says that Dinesh D'Souza is pathetic. I could totally agree. Someone says, Caleb, what do you think of the descriptions of Marxism that claim it has a similar narrative to millenarian eschatological religion? Well, I actually don't know about that. I can't really comment on that because I'm not very well informed about all of that. I will say that that human beings tend to want a purpose in their lives, and that religion has served that purpose largely. It tells you who you are, where you're going, what's right and what's wrong, what you should live for. And that in a lot of ways, religion is fading from the world. And Marxism was often accused of being a secular religion, right? Because people said for Marxists, religion served that purpose, right? It became their religion. Instead of going to church, they had their comrades. Instead of, devoting their life to Christ, they devoted their life to the communist revolution. And there's an element of truth in that Marxism does serve the same psychological need that people have. And I think that, the typical Marxist response when anyone raises that is to get very defensive. And to say, well, Marxism is scientific, it is not religious, we believe in dialectical and historical material. I think when people raise that criticism, they're not so much raising a criticism of Marxism in its beliefs as much as they're raising a criticism about the practice. And that's why I think, it's true that a lot of Marxist groups operate kind of like little religious cults. When, if you look at the German Social Democratic Party of Karl Kautsky, when it was big, despite its flaws, despite the fact it never made a revolution, the failures of it. If you look at it, I mean, it was in many ways almost like the Catholic Church or like, some kind of Protestant institution. It was a community center that gave people an ideology, gave people a community to be part of, took care of people, built a mass movement. And the parallels between Marxism and religion are worth exploring, right? Now, obviously, the parallels ideologically, maybe it serves the same purpose. Maybe like we're all trying to get to a better world. And that's certainly the case. But, the pamphlet, Socialism, Utopian and Scientific by Friedrich Engels distinguishes what made Marxist socialism different than the utopianism that preceded it. And that in a lot of ways, I think there's a lot of what people think is socialism is just kind of what you might call stoicism. And that's always existed, going back to ancient Rome. People who just want a more humane society. People who think that there's more to life than money. People ought to treat each other kindly, do what's right. That happiness comes from doing the right thing and living a moral life. That Stoicism has always been around, and that there's nothing particularly Marxist or even socialist about Stoicism. But on that note, folks, I am going to conclude. It's been fun. It's been big. There's been a lot of us here.